6 weeks before her wedding, my daughter sat down at my kitchen table, wrapped both hands around the coffee mug I had just poured her, and asked me not to come. Not to the reception, not to the ceremony, not to any of it. She had a little speech prepared, I could tell, because she did not touch the coffee, and Emily never leaves my coffee standing unless she is managing me. She said, "Mom, I need to ask you for something big, and I need you to not make it emotional." And then my only child, the girl I raised alone from age 12, looked just past my ear, at the wall, at my sewing machine in the corner with 40 years of light worn into its paint. And she said, "I don't want you at the wedding. Grant's family is, you know what they are? His mother is wearing designer. The senator's wife is coming. And you would show up in something you sewed yourself, and you would tell your stories, and your hands, Mom. People look at your hands. Everything about you needs explaining. And I just want one day, one perfect day that doesn't need explaining. My hands. I want you to look at your own hands while I tell you what mine have done." These hands had, at that exact moment, $430 of her wedding flowers in them, in the shape of a deposit I had wired that morning. These hands had signed 24 years of checks she had never once seen the front of. These hands had, sitting in the back room of a bridal shop across town, though neither of us knew it yet, an appointment with a certain ivory gown that is going to break your heart twice before this story is over. And I folded these hands on my own kitchen table, friends, and I looked at my daughter's perfect face, and I said the only 2 words I trusted: "I understand." She cried a little, out of relief. God help her. Relief. And hugged me on her way out, and took the coffee to go, in my good travel mug, which I want noted, and from my window I watched her drive off in the car whose insurance I had quietly paid for 6 years. And then I sat back down at that table, alone, and I did not cry. I opened the drawer under the telephone and I took out a small blue ledger book, and I put my reading glasses on, and I started reading it from page 1, and friends, that little blue book is going to be read out loud before this story ends. Every entry that matters, I promise you that. But first, I owe you 2 more promises so you know exactly what you are staying for tonight. Here is the second one. 6 days before that wedding, a wedding I was banned from, my hands did something to my daughter's dress that she did not discover for 7 months. 7 months, friends. And when she finally found it, on the worst night of her new marriage, on her closet floor at midnight, what she found sent her driving across town in her pajamas, and what she found at the end of that drive was not me. It was an empty, dark house and a neighbor on a porch saying words that folded my daughter in half. You will be there for all of it. And the third promise. The title of this story mentions a final gift, and half of you think you already know what it was, the box, the one my wedding planner friend carried into that reception with my name on the card. That box was not the final gift, friends. The final gift came 11 months later, and it fits in a palm, and it is older than everyone in this story. And when I tell you what it was and watch you understand it, some of you are going to have to pause this video and go call your mother. If you have ever loved somebody from the service entrance of their life, do one thing for me before we begin. Tap that like button, subscribe if you want more quiet women with ledgers, and tell me in the comments the thing you did for your family that nobody ever saw. Nobody sees it here either, friends. That is rather the point of us. My name is Marion. I am 62 years old. I have altered other women's wedding dresses for 38 years, and my daughter did not want me at hers. Stay with me. Every seam in this story gets pressed flat before we are done. To understand that kitchen table, you need 3 things first: my trade, my Sam, and the tradition. So let me give you all 3 quickly. The way I pin a hem, no wasted motion. The trade first. I have worked at Lucille's Bridal since 1987 in the back, through the curtain, in the room the brides never think about. And I am going to tell you something about my work with no modesty at all, because I have earned the sentence. I am the best alterations woman in this half of the state, and the other half comes to me twice a year in secret. A wedding gown off the rack is a rumor, friends. It is a guess about a woman who does not exist. My job is to take that guess and make it true, 1/8 of an inch at a time, and I have done it for 38 years of brides. The crying kind, the bossy kind, the terrified kind pretending to be the bossy kind, which is most of them. Lucille, who owned the shop until she died, God rest her bones, used to stand in the doorway watching me work and say, "Marion, you know what you actually sell back here. You sell the feeling of being finished." Remember that phrase, friends? The feeling of being finished. It has a second meaning coming, and it earns it. Now, Sam. I married Sam Doyle when I was 24, a millwright with a laugh that made strangers turn around wanting in on the joke, and we had 11 good years in Emily. And when Emily was 12, a chain snapped at the mill, and the world I had went with it. I will not linger, friends. This channel knows what a widow is. The settlement and the little insurance paid off the house and left a cushion, and I was 38 with a 12-year-old. And I made a decision at his funeral that shaped everything you are going to hear tonight, so listen to it carefully. Standing at that graveside, holding Emily's hand, I decided my daughter's life would never once feel the drop. Whatever it cost me, whatever it took, the chain had snapped on my side of the family and it would never, ever reach her side. And friends, I kept that promise. I kept it so well, so quietly, so completely, that my daughter grew up believing the world is simply soft. Hold that. The whole story lives inside that sentence. And now the tradition, the last piece, and then we will get to the money and the shame and the dress. My mother was a seamstress too, and her mother cleaned and mended for a hotel, and in our family there is a thing the women do, and we have done it for as long as anyone can remember. When a daughter of our line marries, her mother sews a secret into the hem of her dress. A short row of tiny stitches in blue thread, forget-me-not blue, hidden inside the hem where only the maker would ever look, and worked into the stitches, small as a whisper, a few words. My grandmother sewed them into my mother's hem in 1953. My mother sewed them into mine in 1984, and I did not find them until Sam's funeral, friends, when I finally took that dress out of its box just to hold something from a happy day. And there, inside the hem in blue, were her words. My mother had stitched, "You were loved before he ever met you." I sat on my bedroom floor holding that hem for 1 hour, friends, 11 years after her death, and she was in the room with me the whole time. That is what the tradition is for. It is a letter that waits. Emily knew the story. I told it to her when she was 9, cross-legged on my bed, both of us with our fingers inside my wedding hem, feeling the little blue ridge of her grandmother's love. And 9-year-old Emily said, solemn as a judge, "Mama, when I get married, you have to do the stitches. Promise." And I promised. And she fell asleep in my bed that night, holding my thimble like a doll. My silver thimble, friends. My grandmother's silver thimble, dented on one side where 3 generations of thumbs have pressed it. You will meet it again at the very end of this story. Now, the money. Let me show you what 24 years of never feeling the drop actually looks like, because Emily never saw it, and you should. People think a seamstress cannot fund a life, friends, so let me correct the record before we open the ledger, because how I had it matters as much as how I spent it. 38 years of steady wages, overtime every wedding season, and private work on the side for the 24 wealthy women who will not let anyone else touch their clothes. A paid-off house since the settlement. A husband's small pension I never touched, invested by a patient credit union man named Arthur every quarter since 1998. And a way of living that my daughter came to call, in company, with a little laugh, my mother's whole Depression-era thing. I drive a 14-year-old sedan, friends, because it starts. I turn collars. I have worn the same good black coat for 11 winters, and it will bury me and look sharp doing it. Not because I had to. Because every dollar I did not spend on myself was a dollar standing guard around that girl, and I liked the look of the guards, friends. I slept fine behind them. So, the blue ledger. I started it the week after Sam's funeral, because grief needs a bookkeeping system or it spends everything twice. And the first entry, October 2001, says, Emily, winter coat and boots, $91, and under it, in the wobbly handwriting of a woman 30 days widowed, it says, she didn't feel the drop. That sentence became the whole book, friends. 24 years of entries, and I am going to read you the spine of it, the way I read it at that kitchen table the day she asked me to disappear. Braces, 3,200, church camp, summer after summer. The good high school with the uniforms, 4 years. College, friends, all 4 years. Tuition after the small scholarship, the dorm, the meal plan, the sorority dues she said everyone's parents paid, $63,000 over 4 years, and she walked that graduation stage debt-free and told her friends she had been lucky with financial aid. I was the financial aid. I sat in that audience in a dress I made, and I was the financial aid. The first car, $11,000. The insurance on it, and then on the next one, auto pay, month after month, 6 years, she has never once seen a car insurance bill in her life. The student loan she did take, the little one for the semester abroad in Florence, I have made every payment on it since 2016. Friends, she thinks it is on some income-based plan. She has told me so at my own table. Eating my pot roast, she said, "Oh, the payments are basically nothing, Mom," and she was right. Nothing is exactly what they cost her. Her phone has been on my family plan since she was 14. She is 29. And then the big ones. The down payment on the townhouse, $35,000, which we called a loan for about 10 minutes, until it became, in her telling, when Grant came along, "Oh, we bought when the market was good. We were really disciplined." Disciplined. Friends, I bit my tongue so hard at that dinner, I tasted iron. And I want to be honest with you the way this channel is always honest. I did not bite it out of nobility. I bit it because I had learned something about my daughter by then, and it had taken me years to admit it. And it is the hardest sentence in this whole story, so I will just say it. Somewhere along the way, my daughter had stopped seeing the money as something that came from me. It came from the world, friends. It came the way weather comes. And the woman attached to it, the woman with the hands, had become somewhere in her 20s a kind of embarrassing pipe the money flowed through. And you do not thank plumbing, friends, and you certainly do not seat it next to the senator's wife. I did not build that blindness on purpose, but I built it, every stitch of it. That is the confession portion of tonight, and I make it with my chin up because the mothers watching know the whole trap of it. You spend 2 decades making the drop invisible, and then you are shocked that she cannot see the net. But before the Whitmores, friends, I owe you the widow years, 3 scenes of them, because the shame that sat down at my kitchen table that morning was not born at any country club. I watched it get born. I just did not recognize it at the time, because it was wearing my own love as a coat. Scene 1, the prom dress. Emily was 16, and the dress she wanted was in a store window at the mall, $400 in 2012 money, and even my guards could not justify it, so I did what our women do. I took a photograph of that window, bought 9 yards of better silk than theirs, and stayed up 4 nights after shop hours, and friends, the dress I built was not like the window. The window would have been embarrassed, and Emily spun in it in my hallway, 16 and shining, and hugged me so hard my pins scattered. And that Saturday, I dropped her at the school gym, and I watched from the car, friends, I always watched her in. And inside the door, a cluster of girls surrounded her, and I could read the pantomime from the parking lot, the touching of the fabric, the amazement, the where. And I saw my daughter's face do something I had never seen it do. It hesitated. And then Emily, 16, said something I could not hear but did not need to, because 2 of the girls glanced toward the parking lot exactly once and never again. And Monday, in the cafeteria line, I have this from Bev's granddaughter, who was behind her, a girl asked Emily straight out where the dress was from, and my daughter said, "Oh, a little place downtown, it's kind of a secret." A little place downtown. Friends, I am the little place downtown. I laughed when I first heard it, I truly did. It is a funny sentence. And then I stood at my sink that night, not laughing, because I had heard the door of something click, quietly, the first click of the ratchet, and I told myself what mothers tell themselves at every click. She is 16. It is a hard age. It is easier than explaining a dead father and a mother with pins in her mouth to girls whose fathers are orthodontists. And maybe it was, friends. But here is what I know now that I did not let myself know at my sink. A child who learns that the truth about her mother is a social liability does not grow out of it on her own. She grows into it. It compounds, friends, quiet as interest, and I was the banker, because every time she hid me and the sky did not fall, I paid the light bill on the lie by simply continuing to be wonderful to her And wonderfulness without witness, year after year, teaches a certain kind of child exactly one lesson. That love will keep coming no matter what you do to the lover. Scene 2. The college drop-off. Quicker, one detail only. Move-in day, her freshman year, the good college, and the parking lot full of fathers in golf shirts, and I had taken the whole day off, packed a cooler, made curtains for her dorm room to match the bedding, hand-sewn, pressed on a rod. I installed myself with my own drill while the roommates' parents watched in wonder. And at the welcome barbecue 1 hour later, a mother in linen asked Emily what her parents did. And my daughter, standing next to me, friends next to me, in front of the curtains gossip had already carried down the hall, said, "My mom works in fashion." In fashion. And the linen mother turned to me, delighted, and asked, "Oh, design side or business side?" And my daughter's eyes met mine over that woman's shoulder, friends, one flash, one plea, and I heard myself say, alterations, mostly couture work, which was true and dressed up all at once. And the woman said, "How marvelous," and moved on. And Emily squeezed my hand, grateful, and I squeezed back, complicit. Complicit, friends. Write that word down and put my name under it. Every ratchet needs 2 hands, the one that turns it and the one that lets it turn, and I have had 3 years of Fridays to face which hand was mine. Scene 3, and this is the one that should have opened my eyes for good, 4 years before the wedding. Emily's graduation dinner, the good restaurant, her friends and their parents, one long table, and the fathers were doing that thing men do, comparing sacrifices, joking about tuition like a war they had all served in together. And one of them, a nice enough man with a boat, raised his glass to the parents, to the checks we wrote, and everyone laughed and drank. And a girl at the table, sweet, sharp, asked, "So Emily, what are you going to do about your loans?" And the table turned, friendly, waiting. And my daughter, 4 glasses of confidence in, waved her hand and said, "Honestly, I got really lucky. Between scholarships and aid, it just kind of worked out. My situation was different." And the table nodded. And the boat father said something about resourceful young ladies. And I sat there, friends at the far end, next to the $63,000, which was wearing my good Navy dress and holding a club soda. And I looked down that long table at my lucky daughter. And for the first time, the very first time, the thought arrived in my head in cold, clear type. She does not know I exist. Not the woman, only the weather. And I want to tell you what I did with that thought, friends, because this is the confession portion again, and I do not flinch in the back room. I paid the check for the whole table. Quietly, on the way to the powder room, all of it, both ends of that long table, the boat father's wine included, and I never told a single soul until this sentence. And when the waiter came looking confused and the table buzzed about which father had done it, I sat there with my club soda and said nothing. Do you see it now, friends? Do you see how deep the disease ran and in whom? Even my rebellion was invisible. Even my scream was a secret. I had spent so long being the little place downtown that when my own soul finally raised its hand to object, it did it anonymously and picked up the tab. So no, friends, when my daughter sat down at my kitchen table 6 weeks before her wedding and asked me to disappear, she was not inventing something. She was graduating from a program with 2 founders. It took me until the door closed behind her to understand that only one of us could end it, and it was never going to be the one who had been raised inside it. It had to be the seamstress. You rip the seam from the side with the knot, friends, always. And then came Grant and the Whitmores and the change of weather. Grant himself, I will say plainly, is not the villain of this story, and you should know that going in. A tax attorney, mannerly, a little starched, the kind of young man who stands when a woman enters a room and means it. The first time Emily brought him to my house, he ate 3 helpings of my chicken and dumplings, asked how long the sewing machine had been in the family, and listened, actually listened, to the answer. I liked him, friends. I like him still. And before this story is over, you are going to find out just how much reason I have. No, the weather that changed my daughter was not the boy. It was the family, and it was what my daughter decided the family required her to be. The Whitmores are money, real money, club money, a name on a hospital wing, and from the day that ring went on, I watched my daughter begin renovating herself like a house going on the market, and somewhere in the renovation, I became the feature you hide before the showing. It came in stages, friends, the way these things always come, each one small enough to swallow. Stage 1, the engagement party at the club. I was invited to that, oh yes, and introduced all evening by my first name only. "This is Marion," my daughter said, hand on my shoulder, warm as anything, to the senator's wife, to Grant's mother, in her silk. "This is Marion. She's been like family forever." Like family. I stood in a room of strangers, friends, wearing the navy dress I had made for the occasion, a dress 2 of the club women complimented, not knowing its maker was inside it, and I was introduced as being like family by the person I had made from scratch. I drove home that night and sat in the driveway a long while, and I told myself what mothers tell themselves at stage 1. She is nervous. It is a big new world. She did not mean it the way it landed. Stage 2, the little corrections. Mom, when you meet Grant's parents properly, maybe don't do the thing where you tell the whole story about Dad and the state fair. It is a lot for people. Mom, they will offer you wine, just take one and hold it. Don't say you don't drink, it makes a thing of it. Mom, I love you, but maybe not the coat. The coat is so old. Here, I will send you a link. She sent me a link, friends, to a coat that cost $400 with a note that said, "Treat yourself for once." I paid her car insurance that same Tuesday, $211. Auto pay. Treat yourself for once. Stage 3 was the tasting menu dinner where I used the wrong small fork for something, apparently, and caught my daughter's eyes across the table. And friends, I have been poor, I have been widowed, I have been tired in ways that have no English words. Nothing in my life has ever made me smaller than the eyes of my own child doing arithmetic on my table manners in front of people she wanted to keep. And still, friends, still, I would have swallowed all of it, every stage, forever. Because mothers of my make are ratchets. We only tighten. We do not know how to go backward. It took the kitchen table to break the ratchet. It took, I don't want you at the wedding, because here is the thing about that morning that I did not tell you at the top. It was not the request that ended 24 years of quiet. It was what she said on her way out the door, with her hand already on the knob. The sentence she thought was the kind one. The sentence she has since told me she rehearsed in the car because she wanted to leave things warm. She said, "And I want you to hear every word of it the way I did." She said, "You understand, right, Mom? It's not about love. You'll be with us at all the family stuff after Thanksgiving, the holidays, all of it at the house. This is just the one day that has to be perfect." And she left. And I stood at my kitchen window watching her pull out, and friends, something in my chest went very, very quiet, the way the shop goes quiet when the last machine shuts off. And I said out loud, to nobody, to Sam maybe, the sentence that started everything you are about to watch. "The house," I said. "She means the house I was buying her." I have to tell you about the lake house now, friends, because it is the part of this story nobody in my family knows to this day. And you are only hearing it because a promise is a promise, and I made you 3. For 2 years before that kitchen table, I had been in quiet talks with Arthur at the credit union and a realtor named Sandy about a property out at Miller Lake. A big old cedar-sided house with a wraparound porch and a dock, 6 bedrooms, the kind of place a family grows rings around like a tree. It was going to be the surprise of my life, friends, the crown of the whole invisible ledger. Because Emily had a dream she had talked about since college, the way young women talk when they think nobody is filing it away, and she would say, "Someday I want one house where everybody comes. Thanksgiving, Christmas, the 4th, kids everywhere, one big table. That is my actual dream, Mom." And her mother, friends, her mother the plumbing, had been 3 signatures and 1 inspection away from making it true. I was going to give it to them the morning after the wedding. Sandy had the folder ready. There was a bow, friends, an actual red bow in my hall closet, bought 2 months early, because I am my mother's daughter, and we do not trust ribbon to be available when joy is scheduled. And 11 days after my daughter told me the one day had to be perfect, and the family stuff could have me after. At the house, I called Sandy, and I heard myself say, "Calm as a hem measurement, Sandy. I am so sorry for your trouble." I am not moving forward. She asked if it was the inspection. I said, no, dear. The foundation issue is on my side. Friends, I want to pause here because I know what some of you are feeling. I felt it too. There is a version of this story where that lake house is a weapon, where I buy it anyway and stand in it alone at Thanksgiving to make a point. And I want you to know I never once considered it. And here is why. Spite is just service with the heat turned around, friends. It is still your whole life pointed at them. I was not looking to reverse the current. I was looking to turn off the pump. So here is what I did in the 6 weeks between that kitchen table and the wedding. And notice, please, what I did not do. I did not cancel her flowers. I did not pull the venue deposit or the caterer's balance or the string quartet. Every wedding commitment I had already made, I honored to the penny. Because the difference between a boundary and a tantrum, friends, is that a boundary keeps its old promises and simply stops making new ones. The wedding I had promised, she got all of it. What I did instead was sit down with Arthur for 2 hours on a Tuesday morning with the blue ledger open between us and unautomate my love. That is the only way I know to say it. The student loan autopay set to end the first of the month after the wedding. The car insurance, same. The phone line, hers to port out, effective the same date. The monthly $400 that had gone quietly into her checking since college. The transfer she had never once mentioned. Not thank you, not what is this. 29 years old and never once asked why the ocean was wet. Ended. Arthur worked down the list without comment, kind man, and at the end he took off his glasses and said, Marian, forgive me, but I have watched you build this scaffolding for 20 years. Are you sure? And I said, Arthur, I am not tearing it down. I am just done holding it up from underneath where nobody can see me. If she wants to know how it stood, she can come look at the foundation. I should tell you about Bev's kitchen, friends, because the plan you just heard did not arrive fully hemmed, and the argument that shaped it deserves the record. Bev has been next door since Reagan, retired postmistress, widowed longer than me, suffers no fools, and files the paperwork on the ones she suffers anyway. 2 days after the kitchen table, I told her everything over her terrible strong coffee, and Bev put her cup down with a click and gave me the speech half of you have been giving me through your screens all night. She said, Marian, cancel it. All of it. The flowers, the quartet, the caterer, every dime that has not cleared. Pull it and let her explain the empty vases to the senator's wife. And another thing. You should be at that wedding in your navy dress in the front row because you paid for the front row. And if she wants you out, she can call security on her own mother in front of 200 people and let the county chew on that. And friends, I want you to know I let that speech all the way in. I did not swat it. I tried it on. The way you try on the dramatic gown you know you will not buy. And I stood in front of the mirror of it a full day. And here is why I put it back on the rack. Everything on Bev's list would have been about being seen. The vases, the front row, the scene, all of it was theater with me at the center. And friends, I did not want the center. I had never once had the center and did not know how to stand in it. And more than that, hear this part, it would have handed my daughter a story where she was the victim of a vindictive mother on her wedding day. She would have lived in that story forever, friends. It has room service. No. Whatever I did had to pass one test, a test I made up that night at my own sink and have used for every hard decision since, and I give it to you now, free of charge. When it is over and everyone can finally see everything, which version of me will be standing there? Play the vases forward, and what stands there is a woman who trashed a wedding for revenge. Play the front row forward, a woman who forced her way in. But play my way forward, friends. Honor every promise. Finish the dress with my best work. Send the quilt, close the pump, and disappear exactly as requested, precisely as requested to the letter of the request. And what is standing there when all of it comes to light, when every receipt surfaces, as receipts always do? A woman who did everything she said she would, gave everything she promised, hid one blessing in a hem, and asked for nothing but the door she was shown. There is no counterattack to that woman, friends. There is nothing to forgive her for and everything to reckon with. And any story my daughter ever tells about her will collapse under one look at the paperwork. Bev listened to all of that with her arms crossed, and she was quiet a minute. And then she said, in her postmistress voice, the one that has weighed every package in this county, fine, yours is better, But I want it noted that mine was faster. It is noted, Bev. 40 years of coffee, friends, and she took every radiation Monday like it was a mail route. And if you do not have a Bev, be one. That is the whole instruction. There is one more piece of those 6 weeks I have to hand you. Small and heavy. About a week before the wedding, a card came in the mail, thick cream stock, and for one wild heartbeat I thought, the invitation. She changed her mind. It was not the invitation, friends. It was a printed card from the Whitmore family, the kind their people send by the box, and it said in engraved letters that a donation had been made in honor of the marriage of Grant and Emily to a children's charity, and under it, in my daughter's handwriting, one line. Thank you for understanding. You're the best, Zoe M. Thank you for understanding. Friends, I stood at my mailbox holding proof that my banishment had been filed under gratitude, stamped, and mailed with the rest of the paperwork, and that little card did something the kitchen table itself had not quite done. It made the whole thing administrative. I was not even a wound to her, friends. I was a task she had completed. I put the card in the blue ledger at the back where documents go, because our family files everything. And I finished my coffee and I drove to work and hemmed 3 brides, and if my stitches were half a thread tighter that day, no one alive could have measured it. That is what composure is, friends, since the comments always ask. It is not the absence of the wound. It is refusing to let the wound pick up the needle. And then, friends, then came the dress. I told you the gown was going to break your heart twice. Here is the first time. Lucille's has been the bridal shop in this county for 50 years, and the Whitmore wedding was the event of the season. And so, of course, the alterations order came through our shop. It was always going to. There is nowhere else. And one Thursday in May, our manager clipped a ticket to the rack in my back room, and I read the name. Whitmore/Doyle, Emily. Final fitting alterations, hem, bustle, bodice 1/4 inch, priority. My daughter's wedding dress, friends, $8,400 of ivory silk bought with, I checked the deposit slip later because I know our systems, bought with money that had passed through my ledger on its way to becoming hers. Hanging in my back room, in my light, under my hands, 6 days before a wedding I was banned from. She never knew, friends. Understand that. Brides do not think about the curtain room. The dress goes away and comes back finished, that is all they know. The feeling of being finished, remember? That is what we sell. And nobody, not Emily, not the manager, nobody in that shop knew that the best hands in the county and the band mother of the bride were the same 2 hands. I stood in front of that gown for a long time. Friends. Alone, after hours, the shop dark except my work light. And I am going to tell you the truth about that hour, because you have earned it and because lying would dishonor it. I thought about declining the ticket, passing it to Renata, who is good. Not me, but good. There was a version of that hour where handing my daughter's hem to another woman was the boundary, the final flourish of the pump turned off. Let a stranger finish her. And I stood there in the dark with my hand on that silk, friends, and I heard my own mother, dead 23 years, clear as a shop bell. She said what she always said when I brought her my anger like a torn seam. She said, "Marian, we do not sew worse because we are sad." So I did the work. 6 evenings, after hours, alone, the best work of my 38 years, friends, and I mean that as a technical statement. Ask anyone who saw that dress move. The bodice sat like it had been grown on her. The bustle fell like water deciding to be a staircase. And on the last evening, with the hem folded open under my work light, I took out the spool of forget-me-not blue that has lived in my grandmother's tin since before I was born, and I threaded the needle, and I put on the silver thimble, and I kept the promise I made to a 9-year-old in 1996. Tiny stitches, friends. 11 of them, hidden inside the hem where only a maker would ever look, and worked among them in thread, in letters smaller than rice, 5 words and 1 initial. You were finished long ago. M. The feeling of being finished, friends. I told you Lucille's phrase had a second meaning coming. My daughter walked down that aisle 6 days later wearing the last thing I will ever say to her from underneath, sewn where she could not see it, could not refuse it, could not be embarrassed by it, a letter that waits, the way my mother's waited for me, the way our women have always mailed love forward into the dark. And I went home, friends, and I hung my navy dress, the one I had made for a wedding I would not attend, back in the closet in its bag. And that Saturday, the Saturday, I worked. I took the whole day's fittings, every bride, and the other girls said it, I heard them, unusually gentle all day. And at 4 o'clock, at what the paper next morning called the moment 200 guests watched Emily Whitmore make her vows in what one attendee described as the most beautifully fitted gown this county has ever produced. At that exact hour, friends, I was on my knees in the curtain room with pins in my mouth, hemming a terrified 19-year-old who had nobody with her, and I told her she looked like morning itself, and she cried, and I did not. Almost did not. There you are, friends. That is the wedding chapter. Some of you wanted me on a microphone at that reception, I know. I read the comments on stories like mine, but I was exactly where the women of my line have always been while other people danced. In the back room, finishing somebody, invisibly. One last time. I owe you the evening of that Saturday too, friends. The after hours of it, because the day did not end at the shop. And what happened at 9 o'clock that night belongs in the record. I got home at 6, fed the cat, warmed soup I did not want, and I will not pretend the house was not loud with quiet. A wedding you are banned from takes all day to not happen to you, friends. It not happens at 10 when you know she is at the hairdresser. It not happens at 3 when the cars would be arriving. It not happens at 4 at the vows while your hands pin a stranger. By evening, I had not happened at that wedding so many times I was worn out from all the events I had not attended, and I sat down in Sam's old chair with the soup and let the television talk to itself. And at 9, my phone lit up. Camille. The planner, my old friend, still on site, running the send-off, and she had sent me one photograph, no caption, and friends, I want to describe it to you exactly, because I have looked at it more times than any photograph I own, and I own 40 years of them. It is golden hour out on the terrace of the venue. Emily is standing alone for a moment, between obligations, half turned from the camera, laughing at something out of frame, and the light is doing what June light does, forgiving everyone, and the dress. Friends, the dress is moving. She is mid-turn and the hem is lifting. Just so, the way silk lifts when the work inside it is true, and every line I spent 6 nights building is doing its quiet job in front of God and 200 people, the bodice sitting like it grew there, the bustle falling like water down a staircase, and inside the lifting hem invisible. 11 blue stitches are flying around that terrace with her, and nobody knows, friends. Nobody in the frame knows what is in the frame. Only the woman in Sam's chair, with soup going cold in her lap. Camille sent one line of text a minute after the photograph. It said, "The whole county is talking about this gown, honey. Your best ever. She danced all night in it." And I sat there, friends, and I want to be honest because we have come too far for anything else. That was the hardest hour of the entire story. Harder than the kitchen table, harder than the ledger with Arthur, harder than what came later in the hospital because the kitchen table was a wound and wounds have adrenaline. But that photograph was just love, friends. Love out on a terrace in golden light. Love that fit her perfectly. Love she was dancing in, sewn by a woman eating soup alone 4 miles away. I let myself cry that night. The only night of the whole affair, and I set a timer. Friends, I actually set the kitchen timer for 20 minutes. My mother's rule, you may fall apart completely, but you must fall apart punctually. And when it rang, I washed my face, and I texted Camille back one line. I said, she was finished long ago. And Camille, who did not know the hem, who could not have known, texted back, well, whoever finished her, it shows. Friends. Some nights the world hands you your own secret back with a bow on it and does not even know it is doing it. I put the phone in the drawer with the blue ledger, and I went to bed, and I slept, friends, deep and dreamless, the sleep of a woman with no promises left unkept and no work left undone. The pump shut off at midnight by its own quiet clockwork while I slept. I had built even the ending to need no hands. Now the box. I did send a gift to that reception, friends, carried in by Camille, the planner, an old friend from 30 years of weddings, who set it on the gift table with her own hands and asked no questions, though her face was a whole interview. It was not a bomb, whatever you are hoping. Inside that box was a quilt. I had been making it for 2 years since the engagement. Every square cut from the dresses of my daughter's childhood, friends, the strawberry print from her 4th birthday, the navy jumper from her first day of school, the sunflower dress she wore the last summer. Her father was alive, 26 squares of a whole girlhood, bordered in ivory, and it had been meant for the lake house, for the foot of a guest bed, for grandchildren to be wrapped in. And on the card, in my best hand, I wrote no speech, friends, no dagger dressed as a blessing. I wrote, every stitch was already yours. Be happy. Love, Mom. And that was all. She texted me from the honeymoon, friends, 11 days in Italy, a country her mother has never seen. The text said, the quilt is stunning, Mom. Everyone was asking about it. You have to make one for Grant's cousin. She is obsessed. You have to make one for Grant's cousin. I read that text twice, standing in my kitchen, and friends, if I had needed 1 ounce more of certainty about the Tuesday morning with Arthur, the good Lord provides. I did not answer it. The first of the month arrived while they were still in Italy, and the pump, friends, quietly, politely, with 60 days of scrupulous legal notice where notice was owed, shut off. I want to be exact about what happened next, because this is the part the entitled relatives in the comments always call cruel, and I want you to watch closely and tell me where the cruelty is. Nothing was taken from my daughter. Hear me. Not one thing she had ever earned, owned, or paid for was touched, because there was no such category, friends, that was rather the discovery lying in wait. A student loan simply began arriving in the name of the person who signed for it. A car insurance company sent its bill to the driver of the car. A phone company texted a porting deadline. And a checking account that had received $400 on the first of every month since the second Bush administration simply received, that month, nothing, the way every other checking account on earth receives nothing, as its natural resting state. I had not harmed her, friends. I had introduced her to the actual temperature of the actual world at age 29, which was 17 years later than the world usually makes the introduction, because for 17 years, a woman with pins in her mouth had stood between her and the thermometer. The phone calls began on the 9th. The first was breezy. Mom, hey, random thing, the loan people sent this scary letter to us. I think they lost your, wait, why is it in my name? Anyway, can you call them? I'm slammed this week. Can you call them? The second call, the 12th, less breezy. The insurance one, Mom, did your card expire or something? Because they are saying the policy lapses Friday, and Grant says we cannot drive uninsured. Can you just fix it? And also, the phone thing keeps texting me something weird. And then, friends, some quiet days, and I could feel across town the sound of 2 young professionals doing math for the first time in the marriage, opening statements, following the plumbing back down the walls, and I knew the shape of what they would find because I had kept it in a blue book for 24 years. They found $400 a month of invisible floor. They found a college with no debt attached and no scholarship on file. They found that we bought when the market was good, had a $35,000 hole in the middle of the wee, and on the 19th, at 7 in the evening, my daughter's car pulled into my driveway hard enough to scatter gravel, and Emily came up my walk holding printouts, friends, actual printouts of her own life, and she did not knock. She never has. And she stood in my kitchen, the scene of the crime, the very table, and she was crying. And what she said was, "Are you punishing me?" Because I asked for one day, and now Grant is asking me questions I don't know how to answer, and the loan is real, and the insurance is real, and I feel like I am going crazy, like the floor is gone, Mom, everything is just gone. And I stood at my counter, friends, and I felt exactly 2 things at once, and I will report them both honestly. A mother's whole body aching to fix it. 24 years of reflex, my hand physically wanting the checkbook the way a smoker's hand wants the pocket. And underneath that, quiet, level, the shop floor voice, the one that measures. And the shop floor voice, one, friends, and this is what it said, and I had not rehearsed it. It came out in one piece, the way a seam rips. I said, "Sweetheart, sit down. No, I am not punishing you. Punishment would mean you owed me something, and you owe me nothing, not $1 of it. It was all a gift. And gifts do not come with invoices. So hear me, There is no bill coming. There will never be a bill. But Emily, a gift needs a giver. And here is what you told me 6 weeks before your wedding. You told me the giver does not match the life. You told me the hands need explaining. You put me somewhere I have never been in your 29 years, honey, outside, and I have thought about it every day since, and I have decided you were right. She started to speak, and I held up my hand. Friends. The hand. And she looked at it, and something in her face just began to arrive. I said, you were right. The outside woman and the inside money never did match. You just had the sides reversed. So I have retired, Emily, not from loving you, from a job you never knew I had and never asked, and the severance was your wedding, paid in full, every flower, and my last day of work was a Saturday in June, and if you want to know what I did on it, I hemmed a stranger who had nobody, and I thought of you every minute, and I would do your whole childhood again for free. But the floor, honey, the floor was never the world being soft. The floor was me lying down where you walked for 24 years, and the one time I stood up to come to a wedding, I was told I did not match the room. A person cannot be both the floor and the guest, Emily. I tried. There is no such job. And my daughter stood in my kitchen, friends, holding printouts of her own foundations, and she said the thing they always say at this stage, the thing that tells you the arrival is not finished. She said, I cannot believe you would blow up my life over one conversation, over an invitation. And she left. And friends, I want to be honest with you because we are close now, you and I. I sat at that table after her car pulled out, and I did not feel triumphant, whatever the revenge channels have taught you to expect at this beat of the story. I felt like a woman who had just finished the longest seam of her life and could not yet tell if it would hold. I fed the cat. I called nobody. And if you are still with me, friends, this is the moment to tap that like button, because the next knock on this story's door is not Emily's, and it changes everything you think you know about who was watching all along. It came 11 days later, on a Sunday, and it was Grant alone. My son-in-law of 11 weeks stood on my porch in weekend clothes with a bakery box, friends, and the first words out of the tax attorney's mouth were, Mrs. Doyle, Marion, I owe you an accounting. And I made coffee, and that starched, mannerly young man sat at my kitchen table, and laid out papers of his own. And what he said, I will give you the shape of, because some of it is his to keep. He had followed the plumbing, friends, all of it, further than Emily had wanted to look. He had found the loan, the insurance, the transfers, the tuition years, and being the kind of man who reads counter-signature lines, he had found what even I forgot could be found, the vendor receipts from his own wedding, the flowers, the quartet, the caterer's balance, item after item, paid weeks before the ceremony, from an account with my name on it. He put the stack down, and he squared its edges, tax attorney to the last, and he looked at me, and friends, his eyes were wet, and he said, She told me you chose not to come. She told me you did not love crowds. I stood at this window, he said, during the vows, and I wondered why a woman would pay for a wedding she would not attend. And now I know what she paid for, and I know what she was not allowed to attend. And Marion, I have been sick about it for a week, and I need to ask you one question, and I need the true answer. Is my wife cruel? Friends. The question sons-in-law ask. And I gave him the true answer because he had earned it with a bakery box and a week of being sick, and because it is the truest paragraph in this whole story, so listen. I said, no, Grant, cruel is a knife that knows it is a knife. My daughter is something more common and more fixable. She is a woman who has never once been cold, deciding the coat is ugly. I built her that way, stitch by stitch, by making sure the cold never touched her. So if you are looking for who to be angry at, there are two of us, and one of us has already retired. But I will tell you what she is underneath it, son, because I sewed the underneath. She is her father's laugh and my mother's spine. And she is 9 years old asleep with a thimble in her fist, and that girl is still in there. And the cold that is coming for your household now, the ordinary, healthy, room temperature cold, may be the only thing on earth that ever lets her out. Grant was quiet a long time. Then he said, She does not know I am here. And I said, I know. And he said, I would like to come again. And friends, for the next 6 months, while my daughter and I did not speak, that young man came to my kitchen every second Sunday, rain or shine, secret as a hem, and drank my coffee and fixed my gutter once and lost to me at gin rummy 13 times. And if you want to know what I think of Grant Whitmore, there is your answer. 13 times, friends. Nobody loses to an old woman 13 times out of politeness. 4, maybe. 13 is love. I have to give you the estranged holidays first, though, friends, because the calendar does not skip pages just because a family is broken, and how a person spends the silence tells you who they are becoming inside it. Thanksgiving came 5 months after the wedding. The first Thanksgiving of my life without my daughter at my table, friends, and I know she spent it at the Whitmore compound, 18 at dinner. I saw the photograph everyone in the county saw, the long table, the low flowers, my girl seated where the light was good. I studied that photograph longer than I should have, and I will tell you what I found in it, because it mattered later. Emily was smiling in it. Friends, of course. She has a beautiful smile. We paid $3,200 for it. But I have known that face since it was 1 minute old, and there is a smile she makes when she is happy and a smile she makes when she is performing happy. They differ by half a thread at the left corner. No one alive can measure it but me. It was the second smile. I closed the photograph, and I want to confess what I felt, because it was not noble. For about 4 seconds, friends, I felt satisfied. The bad satisfaction. The one with sugar on it. See, she is not even happy in paradise. And then I caught it, and I sat with it, and I made myself say the true thing out loud in my kitchen, which is the only discipline I have ever fully trusted. I said, Marion, you do not want her unhappy. You want her honest, and those are different wishes. And a mother who confuses them is just the ratchet wearing a new dress. I spent the day itself at Bev's, 11 of us, retired postal workers and widows, and one enormous nephew who fixed Bev's disposal between courses, and friends. I laughed twice at that table hard enough to need my napkin. And I drove home at 8, and both things were true at once, the laughter and the empty chair in my chest. That is estrangement, friends, for anyone in it right now. It is not one feeling. It is 2 feelings holding the same coat, all day, every day, and neither one ever puts it down. Christmas brought the card. Engraved again, the Whitmores do everything by the box. A photograph of the couple on a ski slope, and inside, printed, wishing you joy this season. And under it, handwritten, 3 words this time. Miss you, Mom. No apology, friends. No telephone call, which sat 4 feet away and weighed less than the card. But I am an honest bookkeeper, and I logged it honestly. Miss you, Mom, was 3 words closer than thank you for understanding. And in the ledger of a long winter, friends, you record even the smallest deposits. I sent a card back. Plain, from the drugstore. A cardinal on snow, and inside I wrote exactly what was true, and nothing that was not. I wrote, I miss you too. I am well. The door is not locked. Love, Mom. The door is not locked, friends. I chose those words with a seamstress's care because everything else I could have written was either a summons or a surrender, and this was neither. It was just a fact about a door, set down quietly where she could find it on whatever night she finally came looking. And in the first days of January, one text arrived, late on a Sunday, and I could feel the wine and the courage in it from across town. It said, I know things are weird. I never wanted things to be weird. I just wanted one day and everything got so crazy after, and I feel like you think I'm this terrible person. And then, a minute later, a second text. Grant doesn't look at me the same, and I don't even know what I did. Friends, I sat with my thumb over that keyboard for a long time. Every wrong answer glowed there, ready. The lecture, the ledger, the you know exactly what you did, all of it true and all of it useless at 11 on a wine Sunday, because a person cannot read a bill by that light. So I wrote back one sentence, and if you are ever holding a phone at this exact spot in your own story, you may have it. I wrote, when you are ready to know what you did, honey, you will not have to ask me, and I will still be here after you find out. She replied with a heart, friends. Just the little heart, which at that stage of an awakening is what a person sends when something has landed too deep to argue with. And then for one more week, silence, and I hemmed my brides and waited the way our women wait, with full hands, friends, never with empty ones. Waiting with empty hands curdles into watching the door. Waiting with full hands is just living, aimed gently in someone's direction. Now I have to tell you about the fall, friends, my fall, the season, and the other kind. Because while that household was learning the temperature of the world came for me too, the way it does, with no regard at all for whose story it is interrupting. In November, a routine mammogram came back with a shadow, then a biopsy, then a kind doctor with tired eyes using the words early, contained, and very treatable, and also using the word cancer, friends, which is a word that does not care how many soothing words you park around it. Surgery was scheduled for the second week of January after the holidays. And here is what estrangement actually costs, friends. This is the bill nobody itemizes. I sat in that parking lot with the pamphlet on the seat, and the first reflex of my whole body was to call my daughter, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, her name under my thumb, and I did not press it. Not out of anger. Hear me, this part is important. I was not withholding. I did not press it because I could not bear for the first call in months to arrive with a claim attached, friends. For 24 years, my love had come with money hidden in it. I would not let my first hello in 5 months come with fear hidden in it. If she came back, she would come back for the woman, not the diagnosis, or what exactly had I retired for. So I told 2 people. Bev next door, 40 years of coffee and fence talk, who assigned herself my recovery like a sergeant, and Grant. I had to, friends, he would have arrived on his Sunday to an empty house, and I watched that young man absorb it at my kitchen table, and I watched him have my exact parking lot moment in reverse. His hand actually moved toward his phone, and I said, Grant, no, not like this. She does not come back to me down a hospital corridor. Guilt is a terrible glue. It holds nothing and stains everything. Promise me. And he looked at me for a long, long moment. Friends, a man being asked to carry one more secret in a marriage, already learning how heavy they get. And he said, I will promise you something better. I promise you she is closer than you think. I did not know what he meant. I let it go. Sick people conserve friends. And now, the night. The one I promised you at the very top, the worst night of my daughter's new marriage, her closet floor, midnight, the 7th month. I was not there, of course. I have assembled it since from both of them, the way you assemble a garment from pieces, and I will sew it for you now, flat and true. It was the 2nd week of January, friends. Note the calendar, the night before my surgery. Though neither of them knew the date, Grant knew only that it was soon, that week, and it was eating him alive. And that night, over a kitchen island of takeout going cold, my daughter and my son-in-law had the fight the whole year had been loading. The money fight, the mother fight, the same fight, and it went to a place it had never gone. Because Grant, sick with his secret, finally said something with an edge on it. He said, you keep saying you lost the floor, Emily. You did not lose the floor. You sent the floor away because you were ashamed of its hands. And one day, and God forgive me, I hope it is one day soon, you are going to find out exactly what those hands were holding up while you were apologizing for them. And he walked out of the kitchen, friends, and my daughter stood there alone, shaking, and did what women in my family do at the bottom of a night. She went looking for something to hold. And what she went and pulled down from the closet shelf was the preservation box, friends, the dress. Her wedding dress, boxed and sealed by the shop, which she had been meaning for 7 months to take for the full heirloom treatment, and never had. She sat on her closet floor at midnight in her pajamas and lifted $8,000 of ivory silk into her lap, just to hold the one day that had been perfect, friends, the day with nothing that needed explaining, and her fingers in the lamplight found a ridge inside the hem. A little raised line, friends, where no line should be, 11 tiny stitches in thread that did not match the ivory, and she turned the hem to the light, and the thread was blue, forget-me-not blue. And my daughter, sitting on her closet floor, was suddenly 9 years old. Friends, cross-legged on my bed with her fingers inside her grandmother's hem, hearing her own voice say, when I get married, you have to do the stitches, promise. She has told me since that she did not remember deciding to read it. Her hands did everything. She turned the stitches over and found the letters, smaller than rice, and by lamplight, 7 months and a lifetime late, my daughter read the last thing I ever said from underneath. You were finished long ago. Monsieur Grant found her, friends, when the sound reached him, and he told me later, and it is the only time I have ever seen the starch fully out of him. He said, Marion, I have never heard a person cry like that. It was like something structural. She was on the floor with the dress over her knees, saying, she was there, over and over, and friends, she was right. In every way a person can mean it. I was there. I had always been there. Where she could not see me, could not refuse me, could not be embarrassed by me. Load-bearing and invisible and blue. And it was on that floor, at that hour, that Grant Whitmore stopped keeping both of his promises to me at once, friends, and I have never once blamed him. He told her. The visits, the gin rummy, the accounting, all of it, and last, because he is brave, the shadow, the word, and the surgery, which was in 9 hours. You know the drive, friends. I promised it to you. My daughter drove across town at 1 in the morning in her pajamas, with the hem still in her hand, the actual dress on the passenger seat like a passenger, and she pulled into my driveway, and the house was dark. Friends, dark as a closed shop, because I was already at the hospital for the dawn prep. Bev had taken me in at 9, and it was Bev's porch light that came on. And Bev, in her robe, who has loved me 40 years and suffers no fools, looked at my daughter standing in my dark driveway holding a wedding dress. And friends, Bev told me every word of what she said proudly the next week, and I am not going to soften it because Bev would never forgive me. She said, well, look who found the hem. She's at St. Luke's, honey. Surgery's at 7. And Emily, wait. Take the dress off the gravel. Your mother worked 6 nights on that hem, and she'll want to know it was cared for. The waiting room at St. Luke's at 6 in the morning, friends, is a great place. And I was already in the back in one of those gowns that closes wrong, doing the crossword to keep my hands honest, when a nurse put her head in and said, Mrs. Doyle, your daughter is here. And I put down the pen, friends. And I want to tell you exactly what walked into that pre-op bay, because I will see it every day for the rest of my life. My daughter, 29 years old, in pajama pants and one of Grant's coats, no sleep in her face, no makeup, no performance, no club, no senator's wife, nothing that needed explaining, and nothing explained, holding of all the things in this world, my old travel mug, the good one, full of coffee she had made in my dark kitchen, with her own key at 2 in the morning, because she could not arrive with empty hands. Her mother's daughter, friends. After everything, the plumbing runs deep. And she stood at the foot of the bed, and she did not say sorry first, and I thank God she did not, because sorry is a word, and my family had run out of patience with words. What she said first, friends, was the accounting. She said, I read the hem. And then I made Grant tell me everything, all of it. The ledger, the loan, the flowers, the lake, Mom. He even knew about the lake, Bev told him, and I have been driving around your block since 2 a.m. rehearsing, and every speech was garbage, so here is what I have. You were the floor, and I called you the flaw. And I brought your own coffee to your own hospital, because it turns out everything I know how to hold was already yours. And then she said small, like 9 years old. They said I can wait right outside. Can I wait right outside? And I looked at my girl, friends, over the top of a crossword in a bay at St. Luke's. On the morning they cut the shadow out of me, and 24 years of ledger, and 6 weeks of ice, and 7 months of silence all came down to the same 2 words they started with. Except this time, friends, this time they were simply true. I said, I understand. And then I said, come here first. And she came, friends. Careful of the tubes, she came. The surgery went the way the tired-eyed doctor promised. Friends, early, contained, out. Radiation through the winter, Bev driving Mondays, Grant Wednesdays, and Emily, my Emily, every Friday without fail, sitting in those waiting rooms full of scarves and courage doing her office work on a laptop beside me like it was the most natural desk in the world. I am 3 years clear this spring, friends. Let us get that said early in the ending, so nobody watches the rest of this through their fingers. Now, the rebuild. I want to tell you how we actually did it, my daughter and I, because the comments under stories like mine always split into 2 camps. The ones shouting no forgiveness, cut her off forever, and the ones sighing family is family. Just hug. And friends, both camps are wrong. And I have 3 years of Fridays to prove it. We rebuilt the way you take in a dress that lied about its size. slowly, on purpose, with every seam opened first. There were rules, and I set them, and it was the second boundary of my life, and easier than the first, the way second seams always are. Rule 1, the money stayed retired. Not one auto pay came back, friends, not the loan, not the insurance, nothing. And here is the part that will surprise the no forgiveness camp. Emily never once asked. Not once in 3 years. They budgeted, they sold the second car, they refinanced the loan into their own future like the 2 working adults they had always technically been. And I watched my daughter learn the actual price of her actual life, line by line, and stand under it. And friends, I want to testify to something the soft camp needs to hear. She got prouder, cold builds muscle, friends. I had robbed her of the gym for 24 years and called it love, and I will go to my grave knowing both things were true at once. Rule 2, the apologies had to be specific and they had to be spread out, and honey, they were. Not one big weeping settlement, friends. That is how people buy their way out of the work. It came in installments over 3 years, at red lights, over dishes. Once, folding my laundry, she held up the old black coat, the 11 winter coat, the coat with the link she once sent me, and she put it on, friends, and looked at herself a long time in my hall mirror and said quietly, "It's beautifully made." I never once looked at the stitching. That is an apology, friends, the kind with the address written correctly. Rule 3 was mine to keep, and it was the hardest, and it is the one I give to every mother watching who is standing where I stood. I had to let her see me. The whole inventory, friends, the tiredness, the fear at the follow-up scans, the price of things, the widow years, the parking lot moments, all of it, because the invisibility had been my doing too. My pride, my Depression-era theater, and you cannot spend 24 years hiding the receipts and then rage that nobody read them. So I showed her the ledger. The whole blue book, friends, one winter Sunday at the kitchen table, the table, and she read it the way you read a diagnosis, both hands. And when she got to the first page, to Emily, winter coat and boots, $91, she didn't feel the drop. My daughter closed the book and looked at me and said, "Mom." I felt everything except the drop. I felt everything except the drop, friends. 29 years, that girl, and 1 sentence, and she finally read the counter-signature line of her own life. And now, friends, the endings you are owed, quick and clean, every thread tied off. Grant. 3 years on, that man calls me on Thursdays about nothing, and last spring he stood up at a Whitmore Club dinner, the club, friends, the actual room I once held a wine glass in without drinking, and when someone asked about his family, he said, "My mother-in-law is the finest craftsman I have ever met in any field, and she taught me gin rummy costs money." The senator's wife laughed. I know because I was at the table, friends, in a dress I made, introduced all evening by my full name, by my daughter, as my mother, the artist behind the dress everyone still talks about. The lake house, sold to a family with 4 children the year of the wedding, and I will not pretend the porch does not flicker through me some Julys. But 2 summers ago, Emily and Grant rented a cabin on the same lake. 1 week, their own money, friends, every dollar of it, and the whole family crowded into it, Bev included, and the big table was a picnic bench, and the one big table dream turned out to fit on a picnic bench just fine, and I did the dishes looking out at the water and settled the account with myself for good. The dream was never the 6 bedrooms, friends. It was the crowd. The crowd came anyway. The quilt lives on their guest bed, and Grant's cousin never got one, friends, and never will, and that is its own small poem. And Lucille's. I still work Tuesdays and Thursdays by appointment, because retirement in my trade is a rumor too. But now, most Saturdays, there is somebody with me in the curtain room. My daughter, friends, 29 going on 10, at my elbow, learning. It started that first spring she asked if she could just watch, and then one Saturday, I put a needle in her hand and an old bridesmaid dress on the form, and her first hem, friends, her first hem looked like a fever chart, and I framed a photograph of it, and she signed it, and it hangs in my back room next to my needle rack, the 2 best pieces in the building. She is not good yet. She is getting good. She has the hands, friends. She always had the hands. She just spent a long time being told by a world I built too soft that hands like ours need explaining. Which brings me at last to the final gift, the real one, the one I promised would fit in a palm. 11 months after the wedding, on the anniversary of nothing at all, an ordinary Saturday in the shop, my daughter finished her first real commission. Friends, a communion dress for Bev's great niece, simple, white, honest work, and I inspected the hem the way my mother inspected mine, seam by seam in the good light, taking my time while she stood there, not breathing. And it held, every stitch. So I went to my work box, Friends, the one that was my mother's, and I took out a small tin. And out of the tin, I took the silver thimble, dented on one side where 4 generations of thumbs have pressed it. The thimble a 9-year-old once fell asleep holding, and I did not make a speech. We are not speech people. You know that by now. I took my daughter's right hand, and I put the thimble on her finger, and I said, "There. Now it needs no explaining." And my daughter looked down at her hand, Friends, at her grandmother's silver on her own finger, and she pressed it to her mouth and cried the good kind, the structural kind. And then she put it back on and finished her seam. Because that is what the women of this family do, with grief and with joy both. We sew straight through them. And that is the story. People ask me, the few who know all of it, whether I ever regret the quiet way I did it, no scene at the reception, no speech with a microphone, just a pump turned off and a hemful of blue. And I tell them what I will now tell you, friends, and then I will let you go. Good seams are invisible. That is the whole craft. That is why you have never noticed the best work in your own closet. And for 24 years, I believed love should be sewn the same way, hidden, load-bearing, never once showing on the outside. I was half right, friends. Love can be quiet. But it must never be invisible, because people cannot cherish what they cannot see, and they cannot see what you spend your whole life hiding. And one Tuesday at a kitchen table, the bill for all that hiding came due, addressed to both of us. So here is my hem, stitched where you can see it, blue as forget-me-not. Do for your family with both hands, friends, but do it in the light. Let them watch you thread the needle. Let them learn what things cost. And if you have a thimble in a tin somewhere and a stubborn one you love who thinks the world is soft, don't wait for a wedding. Some letters should not have to sit in a hem for 7 months. Mail them across the kitchen table tonight.